So, what if what you're carrying around was never yours to begin with? In this video, we're talking about intergenerational trauma and how you inherit your parents' genes and your grandparents' genes through epigenetics. All right, so before we begin, I want to tell you about a book. Okay, it's called It Didn't Start With You. This book really breaks down what inherited trauma looks like, what intergenerational trauma looks like. It talks about family trauma and how it shapes who you are, even if you don't have trauma yourself. You might be carrying the trauma of your parents or of your grandparents. This book talks about epigenetics in a very simple way, and talks about attachment theory and some of the attachments that we make and how we inherit our trauma from other people, from other generations. And it can carry 2 to 3 generations um, down the line. So, if you want to read a good book, a really simple, easy read, I highly recommend Mark Wolyn's book, It Didn't Start With You. Okay. So now let's get into intergenerational trauma. Now, today we're talking about intergenerational trauma, which is very different from historical trauma and cultural trauma. So, when I'm talking about historical trauma and cultural trauma, I'm talking about trauma that is carried through cultures and history and through generations, through certain people groups. So, for example, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders, people of Australia, talking about First Nations people in Canada and America, talking about African American people who carry down the history and the cultural trauma and historical trauma through what was used to be slavery and now obviously coming out of that, but there's still that historical cultural trauma. Okay. So we have historical and cultural trauma, which does tie into intergenerational trauma, but that's also a historical and cultural identity thing that's carried down. So that's just a little bit different. So I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about very briefly, just a very brief overview, because I'm not a scientist on this, but epigenetics and how our genes are passed down. Okay. So, the person who I would recommend looking up if you want to get into epigenetics is Rachel Yehuda. Now, her study was on Holocaust survivors. Okay. So, the grandparents of, so if like today, you would have a grandparent that would have survived the Holocaust. So, the grandparents passed it down to the parents, then passed it down to you today. So in 2016, she looked at Holocaust survivors and how they had passed down their genes for their grandchildren to have high cortisol levels and high stress responses, even though they had never experienced trauma themselves. Okay, so it's quite a groundbreaking study to understand that your cortisol and your stress response system, okay, it's going on high alert as if you were in some form of trauma, but you've never had that trauma yourself. Okay, so have a look at that. And what she found was that genes can pass down 2 to 3 generations, as I said earlier. All right. But the best thing is that we can change. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but we can change. We can be cycle breakers. And that's the most important thing to know. All right. So, as I said, your grandparents might have some trauma. All right. So, for example, I'm going to talk about myself, going to talk about my own history to put it into context. My grandmother, my Oma from Germany, she was in a concentration camp during World War II, okay, during Hitler's regime. She wasn't in a concentration camp because she was Jewish. So different from Holocaust survivors, very different situation. But she was German and she was of a Mennonite community, which is like an Amish community. Okay. And because her family, her brothers and her father refused to fight in the war because it was against their religion, the women got put into a concentration camp along with her disabled brother who had polio. He couldn't fight the war. And those able bodied men who refused to fight Hitler's war were sent off to Siberia to die. Fun fact, they didn't actually die. And we got reunited with one of her brother's sons later on in life, but that's a whole other video. Okay, so my grandmother had significant trauma from Germany. Then, right after the war, she emigrated to Canada, where she met my Opa, who also had his own trauma from the war and from a variety of different complexities in his own life. They met each other. they got married. They had my mom, who is the middle child of three children. She has significant trauma from the epigenetics that are passed down, but also from the family dynamics, because my Oma had a lot of funky family dynamics, let's just say, because of her, the way that her early years were formed. Because when she was young when she was in a concentration camp, and then she immigrated when she was 16. So that gave my mom significant trauma. And then my mom had me. Now, for me, I'm going to tell you something. So, my mom, when I was born, I was the second born. My mother is the second born. Okay. My mom has an older brother, and I have an older brother. When I was born, I was 4 months old, and my mom made the difficult decision to call a local church and to give me and my brother to church families for a time, not forever, but for a time, so they could raise us because she was incapable of raising us at the time. She was in a catatonic state, had severe trauma, and just couldn't take care of us. So she gave us over to some church families. All right. Now, if we're looking at her trauma, which was present trauma, she had a lot going on at the time. She had a lot of present trauma in her life, a lot of difficult family situations in that present moment. But she also had the inherited trauma of her mother, okay, and her father as well, but mostly my Oma. All right. And I think personally that because I was the second born, as she was, that triggered something in her as well. That's my own personal belief. I believe that those behavioral things get passed down. We know that behavioral patterns, we know that attachment styles get passed down. So her difficulty attaching to me as the second born, as the firstborn daughter, mimicked the difficulty she had attaching to her mother. Okay. But going back to epigenetics now, within the epigenetics, when we're looking at it, you pass down your genes. All right. So let's just look at me. So I'm here, right? I talked about my mom who has trauma, had a lot of trauma from her parents as well. And that got passed down. So it gets passed down physically through cortisol stress responses. All right. And then so you're on high alert for stress, for example. You're predispositioned to have a heightened stress response. Not that you're going to have to have a heightened stress response, but your genetic, your DNA, your cells are predispositioned to be on high alert. Okay. So this is me here, right? So my mom married my dad, right? So, and then I became me, and that's 50-50, right? So you get those genes carried down. Now, my mom's genes are going like this: high stress response, because she's got, epigenetic factors from her mom and maybe her grandparents too. I don't know about that. But so this is my mom's um, DNA that's passed down to me. And then she meets my dad. Now, my dad had his own trauma too. My dad is not trauma free. That is for sure. All right. So my dad's going like this. Then I am born. And so guess what my genes are doing? They're also doing this. They're doing that because I am biologically my parents. So my DNA, my cells, my epigenetic factors are going like this. All right. Doesn't mean that they're always going like this, but they will have that predisposition to do this. All right. So then I'm me and I have these cells going off like this. I don't know. Don't, I can't. Please don't quote me on my science of this, because I don't think any scientist goes like this. This is your DNA and this is genetics. But this is how I explain it, because I just think it's a really easy way to explain it. Okay. So this is me. I have, two people with trauma, two parents with trauma passed down to me. So I have both going off. Then I meet my husband. My husband does not come from a trauma background. He does not have significant family trauma that's been passed down to him. So he is like this, and I am like this. And then what happens? We have babies, we have two girls, okay? And then it gets passed down to them. So then they're going like this, which means that they have some good DNA and they have some high cortisol DNA. Okay. It just means that they have that predisposition. It doesn't mean that they're going to, be stressed, be on high alert. But those things do pass down physiologically within our DNA. All right. So that's that. Now, we can be cycle breakers. So I am very much into being a cycle breaker. I do not want my kids to have trauma. I do not want to pass that down to them. They're 9 and 11 currently. And I have really made it my mission in life to understand my own trauma, to understand my own patterns so that I'm not passing that down to my children. Because, yes, while they might have genes that go like this, we're also the things that flow down are behavioral patterns, nervous system baseline. So, where your nervous system is based, like I said, high stress or not. Are you always on high alert? Is it going like this? So, my kids will be a bit like this. I'm like this. They're like this, right? And then attachment styles as well. So, my attachment or lack of attachment to my mother and to my father from being separated from a very young age and having a lot of trauma growing up in childhood, those attachment patterns I don't want to pass down to my children. So I make a conscious choice to be present and to be um, really interacting with them. And then epigenetic changes, as I said, those flow down. And family stories, the stories that we tell ourselves. Okay. If my mom, if the story is that my mom was not a good mom and her mom was not a good mom, then maybe I take on that identity of I'm not a good mom. But I don't believe that. Okay. I don't believe that because I understand trauma. I understand now, thank goodness, I understand that trauma is not the person. Trauma makes our behavior manifest in certain ways. So the things that we do because of our trauma is not necessarily who we are. So I don't equate the fact that my mom made certain decisions and my dad did certain things in my childhood. I don't equate that to the fact that, oh, they don't love me or they didn't love me. I equate that to the fact that they didn't have the capacity, they didn't have the understanding to know any better. Okay, because I understand trauma. They were reacting from their parents and they were taught from their parents and they didn't build up the awareness to know how to parent and how to love better. All right. So then now with me, I am here. I'm building that awareness. I am understanding trauma. I did a whole PhD in trauma to understand my own trauma, but to also help children in school. So my PhD is on trauma informed education to understand how to be trauma informed so that we can better serve children in schools and ourselves. I'm really passionate about helping people understand their trauma, have that awareness so that they can have healing from their trauma. And then we go into change. You can change. As I said, you can change, right? So you can be a cycle breaker. You can break that cycle. Now, what you can't change is you can't change your predisposition with your genetics, but resilience theory. So if you look at Unger, okay, Unger 2017. So look at Michael Unger's resilience research and the differential impact theory. Now, I talk about this in my PhD. The differential impact theory shows that the environment accounts for more of the ways your genes are expressed rather than the susceptibility to that. So, differential susceptibility talks about the epigenetics, it talks about your susceptibility to being resilient or not. Okay. According to your stress response and your cortisol. So it talks about your susceptibility. Differential impact theory looks at the environmental impacts on your gene expression because epigenetics is just that gene expression. Okay. It's how your genes are being expressed. Remember, my kids are going to be like this, but they don't have to. So they can quiet this down. If I give them a good environment, right? So maybe they're born like this. I give them a good environment and oh, calms it down. It's calming down that gene expression. So hopefully it's like this, right? Just a little bit of movement in there, a little bit of predisposition. And maybe if a stressful thing happens, they might, you know, go up a little bit, but we need to be like this. Now, for me, remember, I have this. So if I was born like this and my family factors made it like this, right now I'm in a happy marriage. I have a great job. I love my life. I'm very good. So I'm not like this all the time because my environment is great around me. So now what am I like? This. Maybe I'm like this. I don't know why I'm whispering. Why am I whispering? To whisper. Okay. So maybe I'm like this, right? I'm not like this. Maybe I was born like this. Now I'm like this. Maybe I'm like this. I don't know. I don't actually know. It'd be interesting to actually look at my DNA and see how that's yeah. It may be very interesting. But I'm not a scientist. I don't know any scientists who can actually have a look at that in my gene expression. Maybe one day, but not today. All right. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that I helped break it down for you just a little bit. Now, that's my interpretation of it. Do be warned, that is my interpretation. As I said, not a scientist, not an epigenetic researcher. I'm a researcher in trauma informed practice within schools specifically, but also in how to help ourselves and how to build that hope, because how to change our environment, how to change our lives. You can change your life. You can be a cycle breaker. You can have the awareness, the healing, and the to change your life. Okay. So I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, please subscribe for more. Please leave any comments. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that I touched upon today that you would like to know more of? Please leave me a comment and let me know. And I hope to see you in the next video.